The alien queen had ruled galaxies and conquered fears, but she had never imagined that one day she would walk in on her blind daughter, painting for the very first time. What started as a simple lesson from a humble janitor turned into a discovery that shook the foundations of her royal expectations. As the colors bled across the canvas, it wasn't just the child who was seeing the world anew, it was the queen too. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love tales that touch the heart and challenge the stars, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode will leave you speechless. The palace was as silent as the deep void of space, save for the soft, rhythmic motion of Elias's mop against the marble floors. His worn brown jumpsuit, now faded from countless shifts, caught the harsh light of the royal corridors, illuminating the grime and dust that the palace guards never bothered to clean. Elias had long since grown used to the sight of gold-framed paintings, the delicate tapestries that lined the walls, and the opulent furnishings. To the aliens who occupied the palace, the human janitor was little more than a shadow, invisible to all but the floors he scrubbed and the corners he swept. His job was simple: clean, be silent, go unnoticed. And for the most part he succeeded. But today, something felt different. As Elias made his way down the grand hall of the royal wing, he couldn't help but overhear a conversation from a nearby chamber. The voices were low, but he could still hear the tension in them. The alien queen's voice, regal and powerful, rose above the soft murmurs of the palace attendants. "She cannot be kept locked away any longer," the queen said. "She's already 10 years old. She deserves more than this isolation." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken sadness. Elias stopped in his tracks, unsure of whether he should move or stay. He knew better than to eavesdrop on matters of royalty, but something about the queen's tone pulled at him. "Your Majesty," one of the attendants replied, "she is blind. There is nothing we can do. She will never be able to." "Enough," the queen snapped, cutting off the attendant. "She deserves to experience the world, not through others' eyes, but through her own." The queen's voice softened. "Perhaps someone outside of the palace, someone who doesn't care for status or power, could help her see things differently." Elias's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea how or why, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his name would be spoken next. And when it was, he nearly dropped his mop. "The janitor," the queen said, her voice steady. "He may be the only one who can teach her something I cannot." Elias stood frozen, caught between duty and disbelief. The queen had never acknowledged him directly. He was just the man who cleaned the floors, a faceless servant in the background of their world. But now, he was being called upon for something far greater than any task he had ever been given. He knew his place, and it was never in the queen's world. But something about the desperation in her voice made him think twice. Elias arrived at the royal chambers the next day, his heart pounding in his chest. The queen had summoned him, a lowly janitor, to meet with her. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was out of his depth. The towering palace walls, decorated with gold and fine silk, felt even more imposing today. When he entered the chamber, the queen was waiting. Her presence filled the room, her alien features sharp and regal. But it was her eyes, violet and intense, that held his gaze. She was every bit the ruler of this world, standing tall like an immovable pillar. "Elias Ward," she said, her voice calm yet unwavering. "I need your help." He nodded quickly, unsure of how to respond. The queen continued, her gaze softening just slightly. "It's about my daughter," she began. "She is isolated. She has never seen the world the way others do. She's blind, and yet I cannot keep her locked away any longer. She deserves to experience more than the walls of this palace." Elias felt a pang of sympathy. He'd heard whispers about the queen's daughter, a child hidden away from the world. He knew little about her, only that she was blind and had rarely been seen outside the palace. To Elias, she was just another royal mystery. "Your Majesty, he began, but she raised a hand to stop him. "I know what you're thinking," the queen said. "Why would I ask a janitor for such a task?" She paused, her lips pressing into a thin line. "But you see, you are the only one who does not carry the weight of power in this palace. You are the only one who might be able to help her see beyond the walls, beyond her blindness. You are. Unnoticed, unencumbered. Perhaps you can teach her something that none of us have been able to. And Elias's mind raced. This was no ordinary request. This was something profound. He was being asked to help the Queen's daughter in a way no one else could. He knew the task was beyond him, but he also understood that it might be a chance to make a difference in a world that often overlooked people like him. "I'll try, Your Majesty," he said quietly, "but I can't promise anything." The Queen gave a small nod, her gaze unflinching. "That is all I ask." The first lesson was awkward. Elias stood in front of a blank canvas, the princess seated beside him. Her blind eyes were closed, her fingers resting lightly on the smooth surface of the painting table. The room was quiet, save for the soft rustle of Elias's worn jumpsuit as he moved around her. He had no idea what to say, how to begin, but the Queen's words echoed in his mind. She deserves to experience more than this isolation. "Okay," Elias said, his voice steady but unsure. "We're going to start simple. You feel the brush first." He placed a small rounded paintbrush in her hand, guiding her fingers to grip it. The princess's skin was delicate, like porcelain, and her touch was hesitant. She'd never held a paintbrush before, never touched paint in any form. Elias gently urged her fingers to wrap around the handle, and for a moment they both stood in silence. "I want you to just feel the brush," he continued, his voice soft. "Let it be an extension of your hand. Don't worry about what it looks like yet. Just feel." Her breath was shallow, but she nodded slowly, as if trying to understand what he meant. Elias felt the tension in the air, her frustration, her uncertainty, and it reminded him of his first time with the mop, years ago, unsure of how to make it shine. The thought grounded him. He took a small amount of paint and gently pressed it into her hand, guiding her to the canvas. "Now, I'm going to help you make your first stroke." With Elias's hand over hers, the brush moved slowly across the canvas. The princess's lips parted, and Elias could almost hear her mind racing, trying to comprehend what she was doing. She was feeling the paint, its texture, its weight more than she was seeing it. "Don't worry about being perfect," he said, his voice low. "Just let it flow. Let your hand tell the story." The brush left a soft line on the canvas, jagged and uneven. The princess paused, her hand trembling slightly, as though unsure whether to be proud or disappointed. "Is it right?" she asked softly, her voice full of curiosity. Elias looked at the streak of color on the canvas, imperfect but real. He smiled gently. "It's perfect for your first time." She nodded, her fingers still gripping the brush, her head tilted slightly, as if trying to feel the world through the brushstroke. For a moment, there was no queen, no palace, no kingdom, just a blind girl and a janitor, both learning together. As days turned into weeks, the lessons became less awkward and more fluid. Elias wasn't sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way, the princess began to transform. Her initial hesitation faded, replaced by a quiet determination. Each day she held the brush with more confidence, her strokes more purposeful. At first, it was the texture of the paint she was drawn to, the thick, heavy feel of the oils under her fingers, the way it clung to the brush. But soon, she began to experiment with the colors, mixing them in ways that stunned Elias. He had expected her to be frustrated, to give up, but instead, she embraced the unknown with a quiet strength that surprised him. One afternoon, as they worked, the princess let out a soft sigh of satisfaction. She had just completed a bold, thick line of red, the color bold and vibrant against the blank canvas. Her fingers hovered over the surface, feeling the wet paint as though searching for some deeper meaning in it. "This feels right," she said quietly, as if trying to convince herself. Elias stepped back, glancing at the line. It was jagged, imperfect just like the others, but there was something raw and expressive about it, a sort of energy in the chaotic streak of color. "That's great," he said with a smile. "It's bold, it's real. That's the beauty of it." The princess smiled in return, though it was a small, almost shy smile. "It's like I can see it somehow," she murmured, more to herself than to him. For the first time, Elias understood that it wasn't just about the act of painting, it was about the way she was experiencing the world. The colors weren't just visual, they were tactile, emotional. She was feeling the world through the canvas, understanding it in a way that words couldn't explain. Later that evening, as Elias cleaned up, he noticed the Queen standing in the doorway, watching from a distance. He had become used to her presence, though he still felt the weight of her eyes upon him, measuring, judging. But tonight, there was something different in her gaze. She wasn't scowling or glaring, as she often did. Instead, her expression was one of quiet contemplation. "You've done more than I expected," the Queen said, her voice softer than usual. "She's starting to connect with the world in a way I never thought possible." Elias didn't know what to say. He had never expected this either. "It's not me," he said after a pause. "She's the one doing all the work. She just needed a chance." The Queen nodded slowly, her eyes flickering to her daughter, who was now lost in the rhythm of the brush, her fingers dancing over the canvas as if she could touch the world in ways others couldn't. The Queen spent the next few days in quiet contemplation. She watched from afar as her daughter continued to paint, her fingers moving deftly across the canvas, the colors blending and shifting under her touch. The palace had never felt so silent. The hum of its machinery, the whispers of the attendants, all of it faded into the background as the Queen observed the transformation of her daughter. But there was unease in her heart. Watching the janitor, a mere servant in her eyes, interact so naturally with her daughter unsettled her. She had built her kingdom with authority, with control, and here, in this small, hidden space, Elias had become someone important. He was teaching her daughter to see the world, something no royal scholar, no doctor, no court artist had been able to do. It was maddening. One evening, the Queen entered the chamber to find Elias quietly cleaning the brushes and stacking the palettes, his eyes focused on his task. Her presence was a shadow that filled the room, her alien form towering over him like a storm cloud. "Elias," she said, her voice cold as if testing the waters. "I've seen what you've done for my daughter, but I must ask, why you? Why a janitor?" Elias paused, looking up at her for the first time in days. His hands, still holding a brush, slowly lowered. The Queen's eyes were unreadable, her expression sharp, but there was something vulnerable in her posture, something she rarely allowed others to see. "I'm just a man with a mop," Elias said, his voice low but firm. "I don't know why she's learning this, but I do know that when you're invisible, you see things differently. I can't speak for anyone else. I can only speak for what I know." The Queen's eyes flickered with something, a brief flash of understanding, but it was quickly masked by a sharp frown. She wasn't accustomed to being questioned, especially not by someone of his status. "My daughter's future is everything to me," the Queen said, the weight of her words hanging in the air. "You may think this is simple, but you're changing her in ways I cannot. I fear it will make her weak." Elias stepped forward, slowly, as if he knew this conversation was one that might change everything. "You're wrong," he said softly. "She's stronger than you think. She just needs someone who believes in her." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, thick with the tension of two worlds colliding. Finally, the Queen looked away, her voice barely a whisper. "Perhaps you're right, but you must understand, I cannot let go of her so easily." Elias nodded, understanding the weight of her burden. "No one's asking you to, but sometimes letting her find her own way will make her stronger than holding on to her ever will." The Queen stood there for a moment longer, then nodded slightly, before turning and walking away. The tension had shifted, but there was still much left unsaid. The princess was growing more confident with each lesson. Elias was starting to believe that, perhaps, the impossible was happening, that a blind child was learning to see through the brushstrokes she created. But there were days when doubt crept in, both for him and for the princess. One evening, as they worked together in the quiet of the royal studio, the princess set her brush down with a frustrated sigh. Her fingers were covered in a mix of colors, but it wasn't the paint that seemed to weigh on her. It was the look on her face, the silent frustration that Elias had seen in many of his own struggles. "I don't understand," she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I can't see what I'm painting. I know the colors are there, but they don't make sense. It doesn't feel like I'm getting anywhere." Elias paused, considering her words. He stepped beside her, looking at the unfinished canvas in front of her. The strokes were wild, vibrant, and full of energy, but they were scattered and chaotic. He could understand her frustration. It was one thing to paint, but quite another to truly understand the picture you were creating when you couldn't see it. "You're getting somewhere," Elias said gently, sitting down beside her. "It's not about seeing things in the way others do. It's about feeling them, experiencing them your way. What you're doing here is real." The princess's hands tightened around her brush. "But what if I can't do it? What if I'm never able to make something beautiful?" Elias could feel the weight of her doubt pressing down on him. He had never been a teacher, never imagined himself in this position. He wasn't sure what words could help her, but he knew this. He couldn't let her give up now. "You don't need to see beauty the way the world tells you to," he replied softly. "You've been creating it all along. Your strokes, your colors, they're all part of your journey, and that's what makes it beautiful." The princess's eyes were downcast, her fingers still trembling on the brush, but something about Elias's words seemed to calm her. She took a deep breath, her grip on the brush relaxing. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "You already are," Elias said, his voice steady. "And you'll keep going, even when it feels like you're lost. That's how art works." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the palace around them. Finally, the princess picked up her brush again. It wasn't perfect. None of it was. But it was hers. Elias watched her work, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. She would get there. He had no doubt about that. The tension between Elias and the queen had grown palpable. Though the princess flourished in her lessons, the queen's gaze never wavered from the hidden corners of the palace where her daughter and the janitor spent their time. Elias had never felt more out of place than when the queen's eyes followed his every move, silently judging, questioning, measuring his worth. Yet, over time, Elias noticed something else, a shift in her. She hadn't spoken to him directly in days, but whenever the princess showed progress, the queen's face softened, just slightly. It was as if she couldn't help but see her daughter transforming into someone she never thought possible. One afternoon, the queen came to the studio, her footsteps deliberate and measured, as if preparing for something she was unsure of. Elias, wiping paint from his hands, glanced up at her. The usual icy distance was still there, but there was something new, a crack in the armor. "I've been watching her," the queen said, her voice low but not unfriendly. "She's different. I never imagined that a human could teach her what you have." Elias remained silent, not sure how to respond. The queen had always been distant, commanding and regal, carrying the weight of the universe on her shoulders. But now, in this small room, there was vulnerability in her eyes. "You're teaching her things I can't," the queen continued, the words coming slower now. "Not because I didn't try, but because I don't know how to let go." She stopped a few paces from him, looking at the princess as she painted, her brush moving with a steady rhythm. "I've always protected her," the queen said softly. "I've kept her safe from the world. But I've realized I've kept her from living it too." Elias felt the weight of her words, unsure how to comfort her. He wasn't here to offer wisdom. He was just a man with a mop and a heart full of hope for a child who had never had the chance to see the world for herself. "She needs to make her own path," Elias said quietly, meeting her gaze. "We all do." The queen's eyes flickered, something shifting in the air between them. For the first time since they had met, Elias saw the queen not as a ruler, but as a mother, someone caught in the delicate balance between love and control, between protection and freedom. She gave a single nod, her gaze softening. "Maybe you're right." She paused. "I never thought I would say this, but I'm grateful. You've done what I couldn't." The words hung in the air, more powerful than any decree she had ever made. Elias nodded silently, but inside, something had shifted. He wasn't just the janitor anymore. He was part of something bigger, a change that had begun with one simple act of kindness. The princess's paintings had become more than just experiments in color, they were expressions of her soul. Each stroke, each new hue, seemed to reveal something deeper within her, something even Elias had not expected. The chaotic, jagged lines from her earlier attempts had given way to something more structured, more deliberate. There was still an unmistakable sense of freedom in her work, but now there was also purpose. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the studio, the princess stood before her latest creation. Elias watched her fingers hover over the canvas, as if seeking the right place to begin. The painting before them was unlike anything she had done before. There were no wild splashes of color, no erratic lines. Instead, the canvas held a fluid, almost meditative balance of light and dark, two opposing forces brought into harmony. "I think this is the one," the princess said softly, almost to herself. Elias stepped closer, studying the piece. It was abstract, but there was a depth to it that moved him. He could sense the emotion in it, the peace, the struggle, the hope. It was a reflection of her journey, her growth, and perhaps her acceptance of herself. "You've done something incredible," Elias said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. The princess smiled, but it wasn't a smile of pride. It was something deeper, a quiet recognition of how far she had come. But it was the queen who entered the studio just moments later who would change everything. Her footsteps were heavy, and her presence filled the room in a way that made the air grow still. She had watched from the doorway, her gaze never wavering from the painting. "I didn't expect this," the queen said, her voice tinged with something Elias couldn't quite place: sorrow, wonder. The princess looked up at her mother, her hands trembling slightly, as if unsure how to react. "It's just a painting, mother." The queen took a slow step forward, her eyes not leaving the canvas. "It's more than that," she murmured. "I see it now. I see what you've been doing all along. You've been teaching me too." The words hit Elias like a wave, and for a moment, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the palace around them. The queen, standing before her daughter's work, looked as if the weight of the universe had shifted in that single moment. The painting wasn't just a piece of art, it was a revelation. It was a bridge between two worlds, the one the queen had kept locked away, and the one her daughter was now discovering for herself. And in that moment, something in the queen's heart unlocked. "It's beautiful," the queen whispered, her voice barely audible. "You are beautiful." For the first time, there was no coldness, no distance between them, just a mother and daughter, connected in a way neither had expected. The queen sat silently in her chambers that night, her hands clasped in her lap as she stared out of the large windows that overlooked the palace grounds. The stars glimmered faintly in the distance, their quiet light barely reaching the royal garden below. But within her, something had shifted, something profound that she couldn't quite name. She had always believed that power was something that could be controlled. It was something to be held, to be guarded, to be wielded with force. She had built her empire on this belief, shaping the universe with the sharp edges of her will. But as she stood before her daughter's painting, something had changed. The chaos, the softness, the vulnerability in those strokes had unraveled her understanding of what power truly was. She had watched Elias, the janitor, teaching her daughter, a person of no status, no title, no power, and yet somehow he had given her daughter something far more important than the riches of the galaxy. He had given her a voice, a way to connect with the world in her own terms. The queen had always thought she was the one who should shape her daughter's destiny, but it was Elias who had given her the freedom to find it on her own. It was this new understanding that troubled the queen. For the first time, she realized how tightly she had been holding on to control, how afraid she had been of letting go, of allowing her daughter to live a life outside the gilded cage of royal expectation. That evening, she walked into the studio again. The princess was seated at the easel, working with her usual intensity. Elias was beside her, his hands steady as he mixed colors, his presence calm and unassuming. The queen stood for a moment, watching them, before she spoke. "You were right," the queen said, her voice softer than it had ever been. "I see now. I see what you've done for her." Elias looked up, surprised by the sudden shift in the queen's tone. He said nothing, but nodded. "You've given her more than I ever could," the queen continued. "You've shown her that she doesn't need to be perfect. She just needs to be herself." The princess turned, her expression uncertain. "Mother, no. The queen interrupted gently. "You don't need to explain. I understand now, and I think it's time I let go." For the first time, the queen's words weren't about duty or responsibility. They were about something deeper, something that didn't involve titles or kingdoms or power. It was about love and trust, and giving her daughter the space to find her own way in the world. The queen turned toward Elias. "Thank you," she said simply, the weight of her gratitude clear in her voice, "for helping me see that." Elias didn't speak, but in that moment he understood. This wasn't just a victory for the princess, it was a victory for the queen too. For the first time, she had allowed herself to see the world through someone else's eyes, and it had changed everything. The palace had never felt so alive. In the days following the queen's quiet confession, the entire kingdom seemed to shift. The air was charged with the kind of energy that came from profound change, small, unnoticed at first, but powerful nonetheless. There was a new understanding in the royal chambers, a quiet respect that had been missing before. Elias continued his lessons with the princess, but now there was a different rhythm in their work. The queen, though still distant in her royal duties, had taken to observing them from the doorway more often than not, no longer with skepticism, but with a sense of awe and curiosity. She had found a place in their world, one not defined by her crown, but by her love for her daughter. One afternoon, the princess finished her latest painting, a piece so rich in color and texture it seemed to hum with life. She stepped back, her hands trembling with excitement, as Elias watched her, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. "Do you think this is the one?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Elias nodded, his eyes scanning the canvas. "I think it's beautiful." The princess smiled, a look of deep satisfaction crossing her face. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just creating art. She was creating a space where she could truly express herself, free from the walls that had confined her, free from the expectations of those around her. The queen, who had been standing in the doorway, stepped forward. She looked at her daughter's painting and then at Elias, a softness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. "You've done it," the queen said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "You've helped her see the world in ways I couldn't, and I can't thank you enough for that." End. Elias, though unaccustomed to such words, nodded. He wasn't here for praise. He was here because he believed in the princess, in her potential. But still, the queen's gratitude meant more than he could have ever expected. The princess turned to her mother, her eyes wide. "You really like it?" The queen smiled, her eyes full of affection. "I do. I think it's time I learned to see it too." The two stood together in front of the painting, mother and daughter, united not by blood alone, but by the transformation they had both undergone. And Elias, the quiet janitor who had begun this journey with a mop in his hand, stood beside them. He had helped create something far greater than he had ever imagined, a bridge between worlds, between hearts. And as the sun set over the palace, casting long shadows over the garden, Elias realized that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could create the biggest ripples. His legacy wouldn't be one of royal titles or conquest. It would be the simple truth that a janitor had taught an alien princess to see the world not with her eyes, but with her heart.